Why won't you die?
Steve really. Dude. Scheiße.
Shit.
Stay calm. I just need you to listen to me, okay? I'm an American. Do exactly as I say. As soon as I leave here, I need you to go 5 degrees north for 10.5 miles. You're gonna find the rest of your men there. I need you to take them north 20 miles to the town of Cologne, okay? Do not miss this next part because the war will play out the way it needs to. But when you get home, simply marry your high school sweetheart, have some kids, raise a family. Just be a good man. Do you understand? Okay, just be a good man. Earn this. You got it?
What?
You will. $20.25. Gotta be close. Make it. We're gonna make it.
You're late. Dude, we were supposed to start at 19:43. We're kind of on the edge of tomorrow. What are you doing to that kid anyway? They say those who don't know their history are doomed to repeat it. But repeating history isn't always a bad thing as long as you understand what our forefathers worked through in order to get to where we are today. Now, how can we apply some of that knowledge, wisdom, and understanding to either warfighting or sustainment equipment for the average civilian? Well, it doesn't matter who you are. If you are looking forward and trying to gather some tools and equipment, you sometimes have to look backwards to figure out what's really going to make the most sense.
Guys, I don't know about you, but I'm hurting. I'm hurting today. Thank the Lord for our sponsors that make this possible for us to come out here, have fun, learn stuff at the same time, and be able to make awesome videos for you guys to watch for free every single week. First of those is Steel Industries. We have been friends with Steel Industries for a long time. We've been longtime customers. We don't just get stuff from them, we buy stuff from them. And right now you can get a discount in the description on different kinds of night vision. They also have sales all the time. Any kind of night vision accessory, we highly recommend going to Steel Industries. They have top-notch customer service and are just solid dudes. Also Wetworks. They make phenomenal US-made nylon gear like chest rigs and plate carriers. And all sorts of really cool things that go along with nods, including like a retention lanyard strip, and they're just incredible. They also make the summer combat hoodies that we wear all the time, which I wish I was wearing today instead of this massive wool Wehrmacht uniform. Of course, I got to play, you know, the bad guy. And finally, Onyx Off-Road. They are kind of our go-to mapping tool, especially whenever it comes to creating offline maps that we can access anywhere at any time and are encrypted. Other people can't see them, but if we want to share those maps or those routes or even checkpoints or even maybe caches that we have stored along the way, along with pictures of all of those, we can share those with our buddies and no one else can see it. And if someone starts to not be my buddy anymore, I can just turn off their access to it. There's a lot that you can do with Onyx Off-Road, and if you haven't checked it out, I mean, what are you doing? Anyways, that being said, let's get back to the show. Discounts for all these guys in the description. We don't get a kickback from those discounts. That's just to save you guys money. So, on with the show.
Guten Tag. No. I don't even think you realize what you did. We can't.
Wirklich? They don't understand these things I say on Twitter. Guys, today we are comparing World War II American field equipment and gear to their modern day equivalent. You know, after the GWOT happened, pretty much all civilians and citizens started to model their gear after the hitters, after direct action loadouts. But more recently, there's been a trend back towards sustainment type gear. And when we look at World War II gear, I think what we find is that the purpose of their setups, the purpose of the individual rifleman's loadout, if you want to call it that, was much more in tune to what civilians today will probably find the most use out of. Believe it or not, one of our Patreon members actually suggested this idea to us, and we were like, you know what? That is a phenomenal idea. Let's hop on that. So if you're not involved with Patreon, for $5 a month, you get early access and some behind the scenes looks at everything that we do. Plus, all of our content is completely ad-free on there, so definitely give that a check out. Definitely give that a check out. Definitely give that a check out. What does that even mean? Definitely give it a check out. That doesn't even make sense. Idiot. Stupid. Oh, but in all seriousness, that is an incredible community. We love those guys, and we would love for you guys to hop in and be a part of that. So, with that being said, let's hop into the video, and let's look at some American World War II kit.
Gather weapons and ammo! Gather weapons and ammo!
Now, let's give some brief context here into what America looked like when World War II kicked off. So in the 1940s, it was all hands on deck, from freedom gardens to kids collecting scrap metal to Rosie the Riveter. Everyone was involved. It was an entire nation at war. But our troops were being deployed all around the world, from North Africa to Europe to the Philippines. And as products were being developed and sent out, they didn't have a whole ton of time to re-engineer or redesign some equipment. This meant that for the most part, GIs, soldiers, were receiving generally the same equipment and gear, regardless of where they were sent. Now, this can have some major upsides and downsides. On one hand, the machinery and all of the equipment, from bullets to buckles to buttons, could just be mass produced regardless where it was made in the US. On the other hand, some of this equipment had to perform both in the freezing climate of France, as well as performing in North Africa or the thick jungles of the Philippines. So selecting some equipment that was going to hold up in all of these biomes and spaces around the world was a huge undertaking. And one item that really set its name in history throughout World War II was the M1 Garand. Let's take a look at this rifle and see how it actually performs. I want to shoot some standards with this thing, going all the way back to World War II standards. must say that shooting historic relics like this is, it's quite the experience. A huge thank you to Jerry for letting us shoot this thing.
Jerry.
Jerry Tailgunner. Yeah, very much appreciate it. This is a Garand manufactured back in 1944 in June, and then it was rebarreled in the 60s. And it sure is fun. So again, thank you, Jerry. Now let's deep dive into what makes this gun special, and then we'll compare and contrast it to what you could consider being cutting edge today. Now, over the course of the war, 5 million of these rifles were manufactured, and at the time it was absolutely in a class of its own. The rifle held 8 rounds of .30-06 in its internal magazine, and it fed with M-block clips. Now in the 20s, John Garand was working to make this system feed with a magazine, but because the Army had millions of their belts ready to receive stripper clips that fed their 1903 Springfield rifles, the Ordnance Department requested that they make the rifle capable of feeding from the same style so that their belt could hold 8 rounds instead of 5. But it was also, there was a difference maker here because your belt could not carry as much ammo. More on that later. Now, with a 24-inch barrel, the rifle comes in at 10 pounds roughly, depending on the rifle, because it was made with wood. And because the iron sight, soldiers were expected to make hits out to 500 yards. But the gun could have been capable with even greater distances if necessary. You have to remember that there were no enablers like night vision, scopes, kestrels, or any of those components. And people actually had to be really good. So guys who shot marksman or expert had to have been studs. And that's not knocking today's soldiers. It's just that with scopes, modern ammo, and improved firearm designs, it's not as impressive to make hits on a full-size target out to 500. But with something like this, you absolutely have to tip the hat for sure. Now, during the war, there was a bit of a test that was conducted by almost every nation in regards to the rifle and the calibers. Phase 1 was trying to get almost everyone into a battle rifle, a larger caliber, and holding more than 5 rounds if possible. Semi-auto and full auto rifles were being developed and produced at a rapid rate, but for much of the war, getting a self-feeding system into the hands of every rifleman really did mean the difference between success and failure on every individual battle. Now, as an example, the Japanese Imperial Army used the Type 38 Arisaka bolt action, and that barrel had over 31 inches. Now, I'm sure they got some great muzzle velocity out of that rifle, but I can't even imagine trying to run through the thick jungles of Guadalcanal with a rifle that long.
Plus, it was taller than them.
That's a good point. Now, additionally, it also only held 5 rounds at a time. Compare that to a self-feeding 24-inch Garand that held 8 rounds, and there's a clear winner here. Now, the Germans and the Soviets were quick to engineer some of their own battle rifles, the Gewehr and the SVTs, but the Russian SVTs had a lot of issues, and they primarily had to use the Mosin and various submachine guns, whereas the German school of thought was to have the infantryman prioritize the machine gunner. And the infantrymen would be protecting and supplying those machine gunners as best as possible. Now, they were also dealing with having their factories and supply chains bombed or sabotaged, and ultimately they didn't really get to build a quality, high manufactured, self-loading battle rifle until much later in the war. As nations were trying to decrease the weight of the rifle while still giving high power and good hits on target, that's where phase 2 of the test really began. So where can we compare and contrast a higher recoiling, heavier projectile versus a lightweight subgun? That's where intermediate cartridges come in. So something like a .30 carbine, an 8x33 Kurtz, or a 7.62x39, these all showed some incredible gains, while they weren't issued in mass until after World War II. And that success came from 2 key factors. First, the side with more ammo already has a leg up in infantry skirmishes, and the ability to suppress, maneuver on the enemy requires more than just a couple rounds downrange. You need mass downrange. You also need to be able to carry extra ammo on body in order to send that much firepower downrange. Now, additionally, with intermediate cartridges, you can reduce the weight of the firearm, and you start to give back some energy and some stamina to your soldiers on the battlefield.
Now, for most of the war, the semi-auto M1 Garand really outclassed the opposing riflemen's, but you can see where the intermediate cartridge test landed post-World War II. People now think battle rifles are heavy and recoil, like it's a lot of recoil. That's because the intermediate cartridges proved themselves through World War II and on. And after World War II, Western nations adopted 5.56 in the AR platform, and Eastern forces took the 7.62x39 and the AK. But now we take lightweight carbines and then throw all of our modern enablers on them, like thermal and scopes and optics, and we end up with a 13-pound rifle sometimes even more. So really we're carrying about the same or even more weight on the gun, and most of that weight is just in our technological accessories. Now, as far as range for the average infantryman goes, soldiers today have shorter barrels, different ammo, scopes, ranging systems, but unless you have some special system, the rifleman is still responsible out to 500 meters. It's only individuals with additional training or specific skill sets or different tools that would be expected to make hits at greater distances. And now, all of a sudden, we see a repeat in history, or a rhyme. The Army started worrying about body armor and sunk a lot of money into the M7 program, chambered in 277 Fury. That's a fun story. This new system honestly is a return to the early World War II school of thought. Less ammo, heavier gun, more recoil, all for better stopping power. And you can't argue the fact that 277 Fury performs better against armor compared to 5.56, but a lot of people don't think that this will last. I mean, history has shown us that there is a time and a place for larger caliber or larger cartridges, like the Mark 25 launching a 308 into the mountains of Afghanistan. But there is a reason why the Army originally made the jump away from mass supply of heavy rounds. Again, what is old is now new, but a lot of people are referencing the truths learned in World War II when they're advocating intermediate systems. As stated, this also pertains to how much ammo a soldier can carry. So I guess with that being said, let's dig into LBE and belts. LBE is load bearing equipment.
So now, as you know, the web gear, which is what they called their LBE or kit, was influenced by the rifle. But the truth is, the belt wasn't the most forward-thinking system, and it was a carryover from World War I times. And often soldiers would be making their own modifications to fit their needs. Now, we should note that there was a few different belt systems that were issued and developed as the war drug on. Cavalry and officers would need something different as they were carrying pistols, but for riflemen, the design looked something like this. The belt held 10 M blocks of ammo in each pouch. So on body, you could have 80 rounds plus 8 in the gun. Now, that's already a decrease from the 100 rounds that could be carried on this style belt if you had the 1903 Springfield system. And 80 or 100 rounds often wasn't enough for a sustained firefight, so soldiers would be filling their pockets, looping clips onto their web gear, and even layering bandoliers on top for more ammo. Now, additionally, soldiers would be taking a musette bag and loading it down with whatever they needed. Now, on top of the ammo that they carried, their belts had eyelets in it designed to host other optional items like a canteen, a small med kit, or a bayonet. But one item that is blatantly missing here is a tourniquet, and we'll talk more about that when we get to today's modern gear. Now, at the start of the war, suspenders were not issued along with the belt, and that ended up being a big problem for a lot of GIs. Instead, the idea was to attach your backpack to your belt, and the shoulder straps on your pack would act as suspenders. Now, this kept all of your gear together, and if you needed to throw it on all at once, you could just grab the whole thing and throw it on quickly. It's not a bad idea, but for frontline troops, it was not a preferred system. The pack, or haversack as it was called, didn't hold very much, and it was an absolute pain to open. Each guy would carry a mess kit, a wool blanket, e-tool, bayonet, poncho, and a little bit of food, but it didn't make sense to wear your wool blanket or food on your back when you're running an assault or patrolling. So a lot of guys turned this into just a backpack and then traded, stole, or sewed their own suspenders for the belt. And eventually suspenders were provided to the riflemen, but usually they were reserved for bar gunners, which is the light machine gun style, because their belts were heavier. Now, I also mentioned that the design was a little bit weird. If you tried to use this as an assault pack where you can carry extra explosives or ammunition, it would be an absolute mess to get into if you were trying to get into it under stress. The design is just not how we configure backpacks today. And on one side, the pack does act like a big compression sack. If you were walking long distances, it would be nice to be able to tighten everything down and keep it from flopping around on your back. But on the other side, getting access to anything inside of the bag was a huge pain. Also, the location that they gave for mounting an e-tool meant that the handle would flop around and stick out unless you actually tied it down through the pack itself. So that's just one more thing that you would get hung up on if you were trying to move fast and access something in your pack. So one solution that soldiers found was making a hobo pack with their blanket. Everything you didn't need for fighting would just get rolled up into the blanket and tied down onto the top of the pack. They just had to find a way to problem solve on their own. And later on, we'll get into what was carried in the pack and on body. But now let's contrast today's equipment. All right, finally, it's time to get into what some of the modern kit, just starting by looking at the kit itself, is in regards to comparing it with World War II. Now, you know that intermediate cartridges became a little bit more of a thing. Also, the need for more ammunition, medical, and then a complaint about the layering system was pretty substantial throughout World War II, and they started to solve some of those problems. But let's look at where we are today. So, Drew is wearing 250 rounds of ammunition. He also has an additional 210 rounds in his backpack. The need to be able to get more ammo on body for a standard infantryman loadout if you are fighting. This is not direct action, 3 mags on your slick plate carrier design. This is sustained firefight kind of stuff. When they were struggling with 80 rounds, with some extra in the gun, wasn't a whole ton of ammo. And then with the adoption of intermediate cartridges moving to 5.56, a lot of that problem, I don't want to say it was solved, because in Vietnam they were working with 20 round magazines, but now we have 30 round mags and kit that's able to support extra ammunition. Next is we mentioned the complaint around they didn't have any tourniquets. So Drew has a tourniquet, a cat tourniquet up front here. Just for a little bit of research and information for you guys, today, in today's current conflicts, only 2% of wounds to extremities result in death. Now, that's pretty incredible. That's a very low number. If you go all the way back to World War II, we don't have the exact same statistics or the way to track, but we do know that gunshot wounds, 70% went to an extremity, an arm or a leg, and of that, 30% did not make it. So simply having the ability to throw a tourniquet onto an arm or a leg is mandatory. I mean, you wouldn't even go to a flat range or, hop in a friend's car without expecting to see a tourniquet. So some of that medical capabilities also started to become standardized as a lot of people were realizing, man, a lot of our boys are getting hit in an extremity and we got to have something to resolve that. Next, the complaint around having your sustainment gear tied to your fighting equipment was resolved by having a layering system. So here Drew has a pack. Obviously your backpack can hold assault style gear or sustainment style gear, whatever it is that you need. Just his chest rig is capable to hold his fighting loadout. And if he needs to add armor or take armor off, he can do that as well. So having a layering system all functional together means that, hey, if I don't want to apply my fighting gear and I just want to sustain, dude, just take your backpack. If you're gonna go on an assault or a patrol, take your sustainment gear off as opposed to having it all tied onto your fighting belt. So these are a lot of those complaints and frustrations that at least the American troops had when they were looking at their own gear and wearing it for years at a time, that has then resulted in what we have today. And also, thank God that we have backpacks that are able to function the way that they are, where it's not just a strip of nylon with a bunch of loops and buckles, something where you can actually toss items in there with just a zipper. You can tell your buddy, hey, go grab this thing. It's in my main compartment of this, as opposed to having to undo a whole ton of things. It means that the bag and the pack is now still functional if you are taking it out on an assault. So there's just a quick breakdown on some of the things in regards to kit that we have definitely seen today. Finally, we also have to mention how the gear has become so easy for us to modify on our own. So look at what I have right now. All the pouches are sewn into the nylon, or maybe it's even a part of the nylon itself. And if you want to make any modifications, I want to be able to put a grenade here. I want to be able to put a flashlight here, or more ammo, or a radio. Dude, you would need to then source some of your own needle and thread and be able to sew well enough. And sure, those guys probably knew a little bit more about those kinds of things than we did, but the ability to modify your own gear in the field or even on the fly was just really not even an option. Whereas today we see Velcro as a standard, being able to put, a dangler pouch down below, or molly. So on the front of this split rig, there's molly where we can throw an extra pouch on. I want my rangefinder here. I want a flashlight there. The whole design around gear today is for you to be able to buy something and more or less make it your own. Even the invention of having buckles that are easy to swift clip in and out means that, hey, this H harness or this X harness is preferred for me. And while I like this chest rig, I want to modify that, and all it is just pushing two buckles together. So you have to appreciate how far we have come, as well as how much work these guys did with gear that was considered less than ideal. And that has to highlight, if you're issued something, or if you can only afford so much of a specific product, just because it's not your favorite high-speed preferred thing, dude, go get some reps in, get some work done, and you can probably make it work for yourself with the right amount of training. Now, with all that being said, let's talk about helmets, because this M1 was actually pretty impressive. All right, the M1 steel helmet. This was a little bit iconic during World War II for a couple of reasons. So first of all, you'll notice the shape. It didn't have, like a baseball had a sharp brim that stuck out on either side when you compare it to something like World War I engineering. And additionally, it has an interchangeable layer on the inside. On one hand, you can size it specifically to your head. And secondly, if any of these straps got cut or there were any issues as far as sizing goes, you can just pull it out and replace it again. Now, 22 million of these is a pretty impressive amount. So this actually weighed 3 pounds. And when you compare it to something modern, like one of the new ops cores, without any of the accessories or attachments, this comes in at 2 pounds. So it is a little bit lighter than what they had in World War II. But just like how we look at the rifles, man, we start throwing all these accessories on. And I don't know specifically how much your helmet weighs, but it's definitely more than 3 pounds now when you start considering counterweights, IR strobes, night vision, and things like that. Now, they did have comms, a form of friendly identification like IR strobes, and they had night vision. Back in World War II, they just were not prevalent enough or as easy to make as they are today. So strapping them onto a helmet, that was not going to happen. And the next thing that you'll notice that is also very iconic is the netting that is around the outside. So not only does the netting itself work to break up a little bit of the shine and round shape of the helmet, because camouflage is more than just color blending into an environment. It is also breaking up the shape and the outline. So with this netting, you could be tying on things like, very common, Drew mentioned off camera, how medics would often be putting a med pouch onto a helmet, and an extra easy place to store it, as well as a form of identification. But today we will see a continuation of netting and scrim being used, like this Wetworks scrim. A little bit of Velcro, some multicam or whatever color it is that you want, and some shot cord around it, and you can now change your color. You can still have spots for flags and IR patches, and with the leafy material, it starts to break up the shape of that round helmet. Now, just like how there are extra goodies that are tied on to the outside of this helmet, the same idea with the netting on these M1 steel helmets was that you could take some burlap or even some of the foliage around you and shove it into the helmet if needed to start to break up a little bit of that outline. Now, while I was doing some research on this thing, I actually found something very fascinating. So if you go back and you look at some of those World War II videos like Sands of Iwo Jima, where John Wayne is wearing his helmet, you would never expect him to buckle his helmet, right? Of course not. It's the cool guy factor of not having your helmet buckled. Well, there's actually a reason for it. So during the war, after a big explosion would go off, they would go find some of their own GIs, and unfortunately a lot of them would be killed. And the theory was that, well, there's no frag or shrapnel that's gone through their body. We think what happened was that the helmet trapped a lot of that pressure, and it actually broke their neck. That was the concern. Now, I don't know, maybe that was the case. It could have been TBIs, it could have just been the shockwave, but it even got so prevalent, and they talked about it so much, that officers started issuing commands that if you were going into an assault, or you were thinking you were going to be near artillery or big blasts, do not buckle your helmet. So much so that guys would even ensure they didn't have this buckled if they were jumping into the water, because again, they were concerned that it was going to trap pressure and break your neck. Eventually, partway through the war, they heard about this and they started making these buckles at a breakaway feature, so that at a certain poundage, the buckle would break, and then they started telling everyone, hey, don't be leaving your helmet unbuckled, because every time someone would dive for cover, there's all those iconic photos of guys grabbing the top of their helmet to keep it on. Well, again, if we look at helmets today, from Ear Pro to mounts, this isn't a Wilcox G24. I can't remember who makes this one, Nocturne Industries. Your night vision mounts, your Ear Pro, whatever it is that's going onto the helmet, is designed to have a breakaway feature. Why? Well, because yeah, your nods may be $5,000, $10,000, your Ear Pro could be $1,000, so on and so forth. But replacing your spine or your neck is not going to be as easy as just getting another set of night vision. So breakaway features and the technology around understanding, hey, what happens when a blast goes off? Is your helmet better to leave unbuckled or buckled? We've come a long way, but even once again, some of those complaints have started to cause ripple effects, and now we have breakaway features on a lot of components that go onto our helmets. All right, next, let's get into some of the gear that these guys carried beyond just their fighting loadout and their helmet. First and foremost is the clicker, or a cricket. So I remember seeing these first during the longest day, watching when John Wynne was introducing this idea to all of his guys that were going to be scattered across Normandy and behind enemy lines in German-occupied France. Now, you got to picture a bunch of guys, really for the first time in history, being dropped behind enemy lines out of airplanes en masse right before the biggest armada was about to follow through and try and help those guys. Pitch black, no one knew if they were going to be landing at the correct drop zone. Guys were going to be spread out everywhere. How were you going to figure out if the person in that bush who was maybe checking on chickens or the people that were in that building were friendly or not? Especially considering that they would probably be speaking American, and once again, in German-occupied France in the middle of the night, as soon as you start saying American words, you're probably gonna get shot at. So having a way to identify yourself and others through a clicker was a pretty smart idea. Now, today we have a lot of different forms of identification, whether it's IR patches or strobes or using lasers on our rifles. But even having something like this, which is now just considered a dog training tool, man, they're cheap. They can be mounted onto a rifle if you're buying one from Black Hills Designs. And the idea is 1 click is a request, 2 is confirmation. Now, you also have to know that there was a style of verbal confirmation if you were looking for a friend and they were going to be responding all throughout the Normandy invasion. Flash was a request. Thunder was approval. Yes, flash thunder, and we even hear that in Saving Private Ryan a couple times. So being able to identify yourself to others and them back to you is a huge, it's a huge deal breaker, especially in the chaos of conflict. Now, another way that they would be communicating is through a flashlight. They did not have a whole ton of flashlights in World War II. This is a remake of it. There's something pretty interesting about this thing. So first of all, there's a on, off, and momentary setting on this light itself. So on, obviously, if you turn it all the way on, it's constant on. Next would be off as an option, but the third option would allow you to run this momentary with the added button for Morse code. So if you knew Morse code, man, I wish I had somebody that I could learn Morse code with so I could communicate. And I know that night vision kind of makes that idea null and void, but not everything has to be tactical. The idea that you have a flashlight in order to communicate with someone else, not just to turn a light on and see what you're looking at, is an additional force multiplier. So not only are they using this to search and find people, but also to be able to communicate too. That's a big deal, especially considering they didn't have radios for every single person out there. The next thing that was crucial for a lot of GIs, not everyone got one of these, but it was their version of a jet boil, just a packable stove. So their stoves ran off of gasoline. You fill up your canister, and now you have a stove where you can heat some water, cook some food. That would have been a huge morale boost, considering the fact that the sea rations that you were carrying would have been cold, dry, and boring. Now, if you could get a couple of guys to pull some food together, or maybe you're out in Normandy and you're able to scrounge a chicken, or someone knows what good food you can eat in the forest, you find some mushrooms or whatever else, and you're able to throw it into a hot stew and share it with the boys, that would have been a big deal. So the guys who actually had stoves, GI stoves, man, they would have been your buddies for sure. Now, not to mention, you could also use this to dry out your socks, heat a tent, or just warm your hands for a few minutes. Being able to do that without having to chop down wood, find something dry, start a fire, that would have been the difference between being okay to go to sleep at night and not. All right, the next item that was very crucial beyond fighting gear was the e-tool. And this is also very indicative of a style of warfare that I think a lot of us assume has died. It is not happening anymore, which is a conventional style warfare where one military force gains and works to keep and maintain that ground, even just 50 yards or 500 yards at a time. Now, Hollywood has really built up the idea of being able to do direct action, going in, hitting a target and getting out, when in reality, where are they coming from and where are they going back to? You need to have some space where you can actually dig in, move earth, and protect yourself from whether it's small arms fire, grenades, artillery, or even just people being able to look in. So having the ability for every individual person to dig their own cover and concealment with a foxhole, man, that's crucial. Now, at least through GWAT, we saw a massive amount of HESCO barriers as opposed to a lot of individuals carrying their own foldable multi-tool, which all things considered is very much like the original style e-tool, although it does fold. So a lot of us are thinking, well, I'll probably just be able to build a big old fort. That's great, dude. But if your goal is to be able to pack light and move fast, you're gonna have to have the ability to move earth to some degree. And unless you have not just a dozer or a track hoe, but the ability to fuel and maintain and work on said equipment, it's gonna do nothing for you. It seems like it always comes back to the shovel with the individual soldier, which we are seeing in Ukraine. A mix of trench warfare and fighting to gain even just 100 yards of ground is what we've been seeing in Ukraine against Russia for a couple of years now. So if you don't have an e-tool, bro, go get yourself one. It's well worth the investment. All right, the last two items that go beyond fighting equipment are the gas mask and the gas mask bag, as well as the gas brassard. So these are some items that were used very briefly throughout World War II. So when the Allies were landing at Normandy, there was an estimated 30% chance that Hitler would use gas, as in the same stuff that they were using in World War I to repel the attack. That didn't end up happening, but despite that fact, they still wanted to issue gas masks and waterproof bags for their boys while they were landing at Normandy. Now, very quickly, they realized that was not going to be a problem for them, and they started ditching these. A lot of GIs were then, as they were getting out, charged $40 for their gas mask and bag, which would have been a lot of money at the time, because they did not return their government-issued equipment of a gas mask, bag, and gas mask. Now, the gas brassard, this is actually kind of interesting. This was a piece of paper that was painted with a chemical treatment of some kind so that if gas was in the area and it made contact with your brassard, this piece of paper would turn pink and warn you that you need to hurry up and get your gas mask on. Honestly, it's a lot better idea than just watching your buddy fall over dead and cough his lungs up. I would way rather have a piece of paper that I could wear that would turn pink. Now, once they jumped in the water in Normandy and started to advance, it didn't take long and all the rain and the hard use for these things to just turn into a tiny little piece of paper on their shoulder, and most guys ultimately forgot about it. Comparing and contrasting that today, we've talked about this before on the channel, but if you live anywhere near a large food manufacturing or fertilizer plant or steel or anything like that, having an ability to filter the air, whether it's with a high quality gas mask like from Avon or just a cheap, fast getaway system, the ability to filter and purify the air while you make an exit is crucial. Now, when we look at the invasion of Iraq, a lot of our guys were wearing mop gear. You may even remember that when you go back and you watch Generation Kill. Now, did Saddam actually have WMDs? No, that's probably just another way for politicians to funnel money into their own pockets. All that being said, gas masks were a very short concern during World War II, and all things considered, they really just used the bags as a form of waterproofing some of their own gear or ammunition. All right, so how do these specific tools that go beyond fighting equipment actually pertain to today? Well, there's a couple things that these guys did well. Number one, they carried very little stuff. And the stuff that they had, they maximized to fit their needs. Now, a great example is going back to the waterproof bag. But today, we may have concerns beyond water affecting some of our equipment like radios, solar chargers, batteries, or even night vision. So getting something like a silent bag that does a long list of things for you, as in it protects not just against moisture, but it's also going to protect signals from getting out or damaging signals to get in. It blacks everything out, and it's going to protect all of your equipment. As far as e-tools, the technology has, I guess you could say, come a long way, but really, all things considered, it's just a small handheld shovel. Having a shovel that you can pack and carry as stressed is still a big deal on military fronts. And if you don't have hand tools when a tornado is coming, or if you're trying to protect your home against damaging winds or whatever it is, you need to have some tools in order to protect yourself. And then next is food. So they obviously had sea rations in their bag, but having the ability to boost your own morale. Drew did a video where all he did was eat food, shelf-stable food that was not very tasty. And I can tell you, his morale did not stick around very well for very long. So having something like an MRE, maybe, that does have something tasty in there. It is a self-heating system where you just pour water in and it warms the food for you. Those little tips and tricks that we can take from World War II, we can apply that to today as well. All right, so as we look at some of the extra things that they carried beyond just explosives, ammo, and a few tools, they clearly didn't carry very much. And their haversack as well did not hold a whole ton of equipment beyond a poncho, a wool blanket, a little bit of food, and an e-tool. Well, man, contrast that to today, and it seems like the entire industry is just obsessed with more, a better radio, better night vision, extra comms, on and on and on. But when we look at what these guys were carrying, they were even issued a bigger backpack part of the way through the war, and a lot of people turned it down just because they were like, this is too bulky and I don't want to carry extra stuff. Man, that is not what we hear today. So what can we glean from the people who are known as the greatest generation? Well, if you had been raised in the 20s and 30s, you probably would have already known how to sustain yourself in the woods, how to filter water, how to hunt for food, what roots you can eat, how to dig a hole with an e-tool. Some of those basic principles have been lost. And instead of them begging for more tools, I'm sure they were asking for more stuff like winter gear and so on and so forth. But at the end of the day, we still have to find a hard line. How much stuff do I need to spend my money on? How many knickknacks do I need to carry in my backpack? I think probably the best answer is less than you think. As Mitch, who teaches us some survival things, when you know a lot, you don't need a lot. So these guys were carrying very little, and they were still marching across France towards the Eagle's Nest and getting a lot of work done, simply because they had the knowledge in their head, which weighs nothing, as opposed to a ton of extra equipment. Finally, you also have to tip a hat to their supply chain. Logistics win wars over the tactics and the SOPs. Being able to care for people with food and water and extra socks and a hot meal is going to keep them going. So once again, as you start looking at your personal loadout, you're gonna have to consider, man, do I need more stuff? Or do I need extra food, water, and the knowledge on how to acquire extra parts of those things, as well as maybe the mobility to transport those items too? Now, as we wrap up these tools, how they carried it and what they carried it in or on, which is their apparel, also gets pretty interesting as well. So let's dive into the apparel. All right, when it comes to apparel, the first thing that you're gonna notice is there's no camouflage associated with it. It's just kind of a tan, a khaki, or an OD green. There's a couple reasons for this. First of all, when World War II kicked off, all the tooling for both the Marines and the Army was still kind of a hangover from World War I, and it was not time to try and rechange everything when you're already in the middle and you're under attack of World War II. Now, there was some camouflage that was used, frog skin, primarily in the Pacific, when MacArthur asked for 150,000 uniforms in their frog skin in order to blend in the Pacific a little bit better. And some of that frog skin was also found over in France. But after a few friendly fire incidents, they found that that frog skin pattern looked too much alike to the Waffen-SS pattern. So what can we learn from this? Well, first and foremost, during peacetime, you absolutely have to take time to get all of your tooling and all of your equipment squared away. Once conflict kicks off, that is not time to try and refigure out some of your SOPs or what camouflage you're going to be wearing or how to identify yourself with your friends. Additionally, if you're wearing the exact same camo pattern as everyone else, like we see over in Ukraine, man, you're gonna have to find a different way in order to identify yourself, which is why we're seeing a lot of guys wrapping in tape different colors around their arm, because you'll see a large mix of people in multicam or Scorpion or SCP that looks just like multicam. So if you are looking to have a way to blend in as well as stand out in the right ways in order to identify yourself, after conflict has kicked off, that is not the right time to be doing it. Now that being said, let's go over some of the functionality of the tops and bottoms. All right, so going back to again when the war kicked off, they didn't necessarily develop apparel in order to be a, let's call it force multiplier or a sustainment part of kit like we may view today. So a great example of this would be the M41 jacket. This is just a khaki or OD jacket that was meant to protect your arms and your torso for the most part, insulate you a little bit, but the only two pockets that were on there were just big enough to fit your hands. Think of varsity jacket. They didn't even have any closures on the top, and trying to put anything inside of those pockets was just gonna mean that they were gonna fall out. So what those guys started doing was putting their jacket on, then putting their kit belt on over the top, and stuffing equipment, whether it was grenades, extra food, or water, into their jackets. This would commonly be referred to as a GI gut, just because the only way to carry extra gear in a jacket like that was just throwing it inside of the jacket itself. Now, over time, those complaints started to find their way to higher ups, and they started to develop the M43 jackets that had more pockets. But there was a common group, well, I guess I should say an uncommon group, which were paratroopers that got a unique kind of tops and bottoms, which is what I'm wearing. So these guys were just in a breed of their own. This was, again, one of the first times that especially America was dropping individuals behind enemy lines, and the plan for these guys was to fight unsupported for an extended amount of time, which meant that they started adding bigger pockets to their kit. The ability to carry more ammo, food, water, more maps, a second compass, any of these other accessories that can help them sustain or win a fight meant that it had to go into their pockets, because again, the government spent their money on buying the M1 Garand, not on upgrading their belt kit or any of their other sustainment supplies. So the pockets on their apparel was enough of a distinguishing look that the Germans actually started to identify paratroopers as butchers in baggy clothing. They got their own name because it stood out so much compared to what a lot of other nations were wearing during World War II. Now, today, we see two different classes of modern apparel, I guess we'll say. One is the field jacket. This style jacket is going to be a little bit longer. It's not designed to be tucked into your pants, and it's going to be made of a thicker, heavier cordura or nylon material. The pockets are also going to be on the front, and you're going to be able to access a lot of gear that you're carrying inside of your clothing. But then when plate carriers started to become a thing, the problem was that placing a plate carrier over the pockets that were up here on your breast or down below meant you couldn't even get into them. So we started developing combat apparel. So combat tops are going to be thinner where you're wearing your plate carrier, easier to breathe, and they started moving the pockets over to the arms. So a lot of these developments didn't just happen post-Vietnam. The complaints were happening all the way back to World War II, when people were saying, I need to be able to carry more gear, but I don't want a big bulky backpack. I want to be able to have some sustainment equipment on body while I don't have to have my sleep system with me. So that's where we start to see a lot of the apparel change for the individual team members' needs to sustain themselves as well as win a firefight. Finally, it's worth noting, because there was, again, a concern for blister agents and chemicals to be used during World War II, for a while they were coating their material, they were coating their tops and bottoms in CC2. What is CC2? Well, it is a waxy material that basically turned your clothing into just a big rubber wax insulator. It stopped any gases from coming in, obviously, other than maybe at the sleeves where you'd tie them down tight. And that had potential benefits of keeping gas out, but it also meant that guys would heat cat. They would get way too warm, they'd be sweating, and their apparel couldn't breathe. Now, even today, we have seen selecting the right kind of material to be crucial. Now, whether you're going into the jungles or way out into some mountains where it's going to be frigid cold, wool still is a staple no matter where you go. Cotton kills and wool is king. Just keep that in mind. So to wrap all this up, what can we learn when we look at the issued equipment that the American GIs carried for 3.5 years? Well, I think a lot of us are really hit by paralysis by analysis. We have so much opportunity. There are so many gadgets, so many cool features that we could go buy. When in reality, man, a lot of it comes down to the individual's grit. Some of the difference between those guys back then and let's just take the average civilian now is the willingness to train and get really, really good regardless of what equipment they were issued. It wasn't necessarily the gear that won the war, it was the men and women who put in the work to actually make it happen. Now, I think a lot of us have been, again, paralyzed by the idea that we have to have the coolest, fastest, direct action plate carrier loadout with 3 magazines and a back panel. The problem is when we fall into a trap like that, we're honestly repeating some of the complaints or some of the issues that our American GIs had during World War II. The need for more ammo and a smaller backpack could not have been more loud and more clear from these guys during World War II. They did not want a bigger backpack, even though it was offered to them. They did not want, you know, a slick jacket that didn't have pockets on it. No, they needed gear to help them do 2 things, sustain and fight. That was it. They were not carrying around a whole ton of fancy little tools. They were there on a mission because they had something bigger than themselves to fight for. So men of grit and men of faith went to work, and they knew it may cost them their lives and maybe even more. So to wrap this up, an encouragement for you guys is to do more with less. If you have a plate carrier, if you have a chest rigger, if you have a good rifle, maybe stop looking at the next thing to buy and start looking at what very small modifications you can do with the equipment that you have at home in order to carry extra medical, to carry more ammunition, or to make your helmet more comfortable. You don't have to go out and spend a whole ton of money. And you can get a lot of work done with very, very little. Now with that, guys, I would encourage you to do 3 things. Work out, go to the range, and open your Bible.
You both. I mean, your call. You're calling how you want to do it. To choke me. Yep.
Okay.
And as soon as I actually get this.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I didn't even see. Yeah, hold on. So, yeah, I know.
What do you think? It's good, right? Ja. Hallo. Guten Abend.
I'm torn between you keeping it and not.
Should I shave it? Don't
You know-
expect the cat.
I noticed something about you.
What?